I would like to welcome our first speaker for this panel, Dr. Judy, Omumbo, a vector-borne disease epidemiologist and an accomplished climate change and global health expert. She's the head of programs at Science for Africa Foundation, where she manages programs that develop research excellence, career progression of emerging African scientists, and facilitates the research ecosystem in Africa. She's a member of multiple international organizations focused on climate change and frequently advises on national policy concerns, including vector control, anti-malaria drug resistance, and climate change. Please welcome her to the stage.
Well, good morning, Pittsburgh. I hope you can all hear me. So it's such a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I bring you warm greetings from Africa. We're looking at the world around us, and today I'd like to move us all to a different context from what you're probably really used to, looking at a special problem that is based in Africa and really around the area of work that I lead and perhaps have been working in for many years. But first, I'd really like to thank Dr. Elizabeth Coleman, because you've really placed it where it is. You know, after all these years, it's 2024, and we're still very much back at the place where we're not allowed to ride the bicycle. We're really still there. And I think this is even more pertinent in Africa, the role of women in really driving and leading and being the ones who are seen. And so my talk actually covers a little bit of that. So thank you. We could have the first slide, please. This is amazing. I thank you very much, the visual support over there. We've just loaded this. They managed to do that very quickly. So I've modified the title a little bit because it's really more about women being at the heart of sustainable agriculture. Because what influences our nutrients as women, what influences our food, it really comes from what is grown and what we understand about what is grown and where it comes from. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. A little bit about our organization, because if I don't say anything, our comms department will kill me, is that we are a science-based organization. We see ourselves and have built ourselves as a trusted partner for partnerships across the continent. We implement several programs within the ecosystem of science. And the idea is so that we support Africa's best researchers and best science to deliver interventions for sustainable development. We provide a holistic support through the entire research chain, from the discovery sciences, what goes around the Earth. Is it the sun or is it the Earth that goes round? Translational sciences, and implementation. Very much focused on science products. So we raise leaders, we look at the quality of the science, we really focus on products, as I said. We build strategic partnerships, really looking at first designing our own programs and then looking for the partners after we have identified priorities. And then to really hold ourselves up as a well-governed, reliable partner within the continent. And so we do work in 4 areas. First, looking at the priorities, not by ourselves, but really engaging Africa's best researchers and partners to help us think through what's important for our continent. We find as scientists on the continent that often we're not involved in that decision. You know, if you think about even for Sustainable Development Goals, I didn't see any Africans there. And yet, our lives are rotating around those goals. I'm not criticizing the goals, it's just that's just the situation. And then, with those priorities, we sit down and design the right program, the right intervention, and then we mobilize funding for those priorities. And finally, we do the oversight for these programs that we've implemented in the ecosystem. So, the world around us. The climate crisis is a major priority for Africa. The climate crisis has impacted the whole globe, but Africa has particularly vulnerabilities related to climate change. It's a massive crisis because of the challenges that it places upon a very important sector for us, economic sector, and that's agriculture. Much of Africa's economies are run because we run through agriculture. Now, the agriculture on the continent is really run by women. Women are at the heart of agriculture. They, unfortunately, are underrepresented at all levels when it comes to decision-making about how that agriculture is run. So we're really looking at programs to empower women really at the highest level to take the leadership in ensuring that our food systems are healthy and that they're addressing key challenges for the sector. Now, the biggest thing that we have is as a challenge for climate is really the fact that there are extreme events, a lot more extreme events across the continent. I think when you look at the news, there's flooding, there's landslides, there's the compacted and extended events that happen from these things where populations get moved from where they live, and there are political crises that really make it very difficult for people to look at issues concerning their religion, their nutrition and their food and how they grow their food. We can see a 50% reduction by the end of the century in crop yields and a 90% decrease in crop revenues related to climate change. These extreme weather conditions are worsening, and they will have a long-lasting effect on food production, with the risk of deepening food insecurity and disrupted livelihoods. Around that also, we're looking at globally a reduction in the availability of water. So these are serious crises for the agricultural sector. Now, those are the environmental challenges that are going on, but then also we are living in the Anthropocene, and many of these things are challenges that mankind, the human beings, we have put on our environment. I think one of the biggest things that we see a struggle with is the need for food to be moved from one place to another for long miles and many days. And then all the poisons tend to be introduced in that process because we need food to live longer than it should. I mean, we now have cabbage that you can keep in your refrigerator for 3 weeks, it doesn't rot. And that's also where they really add things to make sure it doesn't ripen early and that it stays for a long time in storage. Again, this is where the gaps in food and safety standards tend to be introduced, again, when we're trying to store food for a long time. And the big challenge of the vulnerability of global food markets. I live in Kenya, where I think farmers are really encouraged to grow. Agriculture is really led by a desire to make a buck. So what happens is we find that rural farmers are being discouraged a lot, and we're moving towards large farms with monocrops, and particularly growing crops that we don't really eat on the continent. For example, if you go to many countries in Europe, we'll find French beans, sweet peppers in the stores, and they're labeled made in Kenya, which we can see as, with pride. But nobody eats French beans in Kenya. Nobody eats red peppers. So we have an agriculture that is moving away from the diets of the local people. So one of the biggest challenges is that we do have very senior women who are movers and changers in the sector, but they're not seen. They're not seen. I'll give an example of Dr. Sarah Mbago-Mbunu, who's the regional director of IFAD, who have put out a really good strategy for the next few years, the Nutrition Action Plan 2019 to 2025, that emphasizes the provision of nutritionally rich foods and diversified diets. This is really important, and I'll tell you why. 61% of Africa's population, that's 868 million people, experienced moderate to severe food insecurity. Now, in Africa, this is really high compared with the rest of the world. The global prevalence is just half of that. Undernourishment, again, 282 million people in 2022. We're in 2024. This is a very modern world. And those figures truly are unacceptable. So what is driving this? Aside from the environmental degradation and extreme climate events, political insecurity, conflicts, unaffordability, the high food import prices, and poverty and poor nutrition. These are things that we hear about in the news all the time. And this is the message that we always get from Africa, that it's a completely untenable situation and it's just going to get worse and worse. So in preparing for this talk, I was just reading the statistics and the photograph. And I like, again, where Elizabeth mentioned how we tell a story. When we tell the story like that, then we feel like we can just give up. There's a need for a transformation, to be looking more at sustainability and not profitability in the food system, in Africa's food system. The profitability has come from really a political agenda and really based on, not led by women. You know, it's hard, I don't want to say who's led it, but really not led by women. I think there is a need to transform that sector and bring women to a higher level. One of the challenges we have, again, is that when we think about agriculture in Africa and women, it is a really tired young woman who looks really old. She's in the field with 5 children. She's bent over. Her life expectancy is 40 years. And that is the image that we see of Africa. But there are women in Africa now. It's simply not true anymore. Women in Africa now who can lead this agenda. And I think one of the things that we need to do, if we're looking at the more upstream drivers of poor nutrition and undernourishment, is to make sure, to see how we can implement programs that support women who are able to do something and to move a wheel so that they can be innovators for improvement in this sector. Now, science has had a role in the current system, and really our current food system, the unsustainable current food system, is because of science. So we must think as researchers and as leaders in science what we need to do about that, to change, make that paradigm shift, so that science is really thinking about people and not thinking about making things easier all the time or changing things so that we don't have to do anything. There are ways, and particularly in Africa, there's a lot to learn from doing things within natural systems. This is an environment that is very, very, the greatest biodiversity in the world, the emerging workforce, the greatest proportion of young people, the next generation, who can be influenced in a different way, so that we're not thinking about 1886, but we're moving forward to 2050 and really with bringing the next generation and then their ideas with it. And then the influence of powerful actors. Again, it's the science partnering with powerful actors who are looking at this from an angle of profitability. And then this reinforces those unsustainable practices. For us as an organization, our focus would like to be on the midstream post-harvest investors. There is a challenge with food because we are on the continent. Our food is very much fed by rain and seasonal rain, and therefore there are seasons when we have bountiful harvests, and then in between those seasons there is no food. There is a need to build that sector so that we can look at how we can produce some innovations that make sure that we can keep food fresh or provide. Sometimes there are simple solutions like refrigeration or drying. And I think everybody has a grandmother who knows something about fermentation. You know, your Greek grandmother who has the starter for the yogurt. Your Jewish grandmother who knows how to make the starter for the bagels. Your Japanese grandmother who has the starter for the miso. And my own grandmother who has the starter for the porridge. I have a very good Japanese friend who I did ask about now and said, Takako, I'd like to make some miso soup. How to make the miso? She said, you want to make the miso? Oh, no. Only your grandmother makes the miso. Even I don't make the miso. So many of these things, are going out of style because we're looking for easy solutions. But this is a healthy way of keeping food between harvest and harvest. So this is actually just some statistics on what agriculture looks like. It's the most climate-sensitive sector in Africa, and highly vulnerable. This is the same. This is quotes from the 2021 Feed Africa review, and still between 2015 and 2021, the stats have remained the same. But I just want to put it to you that women can be the agents of change in this sector. And the World Bank has estimated that yield could increase by up to 30%, and total output from agriculture could rise up by about 4% just by giving equal access to women. Now, these are things that we know, but are these things that science is thinking about? Science has changed. We're now not just doing science in silos. We're actually working in the political arena. We're working with private partners. There are things that as scientists we need to push. Just as scientists need to push for peace, to understand peace, and to make recommendations for peace and publish about things like that. Similarly, to push for women's equal access to areas like this, the world around us. So I can't speak enough about women's unique knowledge about food and agriculture. Certainly in Africa, women know very well what seeds grow best. They know very well what seed to share with the neighbor. They know very well what their children will eat. They also know very well what the elderly who they care for will eat. And therefore, in rural areas, they do grow their crops according to the right needs, with considerations of nutrition. Another area is that we can work with women and use the local knowledge to look at the diversification of food crops. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot around biodiversity across the continent, and many of our traditional food crops are falling out of use because they're no longer sexy. Tons of vegetables, for example. They're just falling out of use because we're really being encouraged as a continent to use seeds that have been produced somewhere else. They've got extra muscles and vim and verve in them, but they're not perhaps as nutritious as the traditional diets. So enhancing women's participation could help really foster a better use of seeds and better diversification. Women's already, and we saw this during the COVID pandemic as well, really innovations in the food system, particularly on how to grow food in local communities and produce that and share it, sort of a barter system. There were women's groups who got together and, decided so-and-so would be growing carrots and so-and-so would be growing onions, and then, they grow different crops that are staples and then would share. And people would have them in the back of their cars. They would package for you. You could send in, in Kenya, our digital phone system is really well advanced. You could send them a text message and they would be able to pick up somewhere at their gate a package of food that is just locally grown, no pesticides. You have seen it as you drive past growing, and it's dropped off at your house. This happened in the cities and even in rural areas. So innovations, they're all in here. So this is actually just, addressing undernutrition and malnutrition. And again, just looking at how women can elevate diversification of crops and really changing the structure of the diet, using more vegetables, legumes. I mean, we're talking about diets that are sustainable, what we call within planetary boundaries, again, we can develop more nutritious food. However, most of the globe can't afford a healthy diet, 40%. And this is a very neglected area, Africa's traditional foods. Africa's traditional foods they adapt much better to the changing climate in Africa because they have grown within a changing climate over millions of years. You know, the history of Africa goes into the millions of years. And really, they need the fact that they don't need as many pesticides, fertilizers, and so on. They can grow in those dry conditions. We really feel that this is an area of research that needs to be amplified a lot more. So the connection is really looking at the environment. Part of what is important is just to make sure that biodiversity is considered in the agricultural, the whole agricultural sector, and so that we're not clearing land to grow fields of French beans. I have nothing against French beans, but we're clearing land to grow crops that are not really nutritious and they're not biodiverse, and they really have been modified so much. And this is another area where women can take part. As you can see, this looks like a normal diet for today, doesn't it? And most restaurants you go to, that's what your food would look like. Now, this is really a global shift. Again, it's a poor quality diet. It's really very much related to changes in lifestyle. We don't have time. We don't have, actually, as women as well, we've got to a point where we just don't want to cook anymore. If it's quick, if it's ready, then that's what your family is going to eat. I do have issues with the fact that it's us women who have to worry about this. I too sometimes feel if somebody else asked me what we're eating for dinner. But we do need to do something about that. So why are we thinking about planetary diets? We need a sustainable and healthy food system. We also need to have good women's health. The health of women impacts on the health of families and the health of nations as a whole. Africa's rich biodiversity and traditional food systems are a really good example for looking at how a good planetary diet could be made. Unfortunately, our diets are going, again, in the direction of the previous ones. And then I just did a search for what is a planetary diet, for example, a menu from Africa. And this is just an online search. And I found that breakfast, maize, porridge, lunch, lentil stew with millet, dinner a little heavier because you've coming into the field, some fish grilled with sweet potato that's not modified, and then fruits, locally grown fruits. Then I thought, hang on a minute, that's what I used to eat every day as a child. This was normal and doable. This is what people in the villages eat. They may not have a fruit salad, but they will have a mango, they'll have a banana, they'll have a piece of papaya. So we need to we need to look at what we define as consider as important for sustainable food systems. First, we need to transform those systems and look at the cost of food. The cost of food is up because of the need to transport it, is also up because the agenda for growing food is being taken from local communities, and we as a scientific community are supporting that agenda. We need to look at trade-offs. There are no incentives for growing food close to you anymore. There are no incentives for buying from the local farmers market. Indeed, here, and on our continent as well, if you want to go to a farmer's market, then make sure you've got extra money. That's the most expensive food that you can buy. And then there's also challenges in healthy eating. I think predominantly because if you want to eat healthy, it costs so much, it takes a lot of time, you've got to wash the dirt off it before you chop the leeks up, all those kinds of things become challenges. Now, I mentioned raising the bar, raising the expectation, the ambition for women agriculture from just looking at the local, the really grassroots level, to building innovators. supporting women researchers at much higher levels and women implementers at a much higher level to make that change, to bring in those innovations and send them to market. I think that is an area that has not really been addressed and could be looked into a lot more. Building capacity, leadership, placing us in decision-making areas, and supporting that, helping us to work together collaboratively, because this is something that women naturally do very well. There are areas where women are already doing a lot of interventions, looking at agroecology, growing really trees that can produce fruits, looking at indigenous knowledge around resilient crop varieties and growing more of those, and then, again, the post-harvest innovations. There's just a long list of other interventions, really in the policy arena: equality, partnerships and funding in the right direction, funding women-led initiatives, social protection, social protection strategies that address some of the barriers that explore, where are the social scientists and all of this? What are the barriers that women have to being brought into this sector? And then inclusive agricultural research. Now, one of the biggest things is to foster a change in mindset. We have a mindset about our food. There is sometimes even a tendency to look down on foods that are sustainable because we want to be like other countries. We want to be able to get our food on the fly, to buy it from the car. Things like that are very worrying. 20 minutes goes very fast, this is actually my last slide, and it just depicts a family where everyone is in the kitchen cooking. Empowering women is not just a moral imperative. It's a strategic approach to achieving food security, to tackle climate change, and ensure sustainable diets for all. But then most importantly, we must teach our families to cook and to enjoy engaging with our food and understanding where it comes from. To make it a thing that we do just like we have personal hygiene, that we all come together and think about that meal. Thank you.